So in this video, first of all, I'm going to look at which personnel and systems both Jurgen Klopp and Pep Guardiola would use if they were appointed Manchester United manager right now. I'll cover how they would use certain players and which players I think would thrive and which players would struggle, whilst also looking at 3 signings each I think both managers would make if they were manager of Manchester United. This video was edited by Football Factor, so check his channel out, it will be linked in the description below. But before that, for cheap good quality football jerseys, retro jerseys and tracksuits, go over to www.jerseyfifa.com. If you watch my podcast clip from last week, you'll see I was wearing that Manchester United retro jersey from 2003-2004, and I got that shirt from Jersey FIFA, and I've also bought some other retro jerseys and a tracksuit from there as well, so I can tell you it is high quality, and it's much cheaper than buying from the club store or from Nike or Adidas because they bump up the prices massively. So go and check out the products using the link in the description and use code ATLANTISFOOTBALL for 5% off. So before I look at either Klopp or Guardiola at Manchester United, I'm first going to give a brief managerial analysis of both of the two and how they differ in style and ability to Solskjaer. So I think the easiest way of judging managers is to split them into 2 categories, which I did speak about in my Antonio Conte at Manchester United video, that will be linked in the description. But what I was talking about is you have either knockout managers or league managers. Now obviously there can be a crossover, there can be certain managers who have attributes that would make them more of a knockout manager, but mostly be a league manager, so it's not one or the other. But in terms of Jurgen Klopp we'll start with, I think Klopp is definitely more of a knockout manager than a league manager, which isn't to say that he isn't a good league manager, as this applies to Guardiola as well. These two are elite level managers and don't have too many faults, but it is their best attributes that do align them with either the knockout or league manager categories, and I will go for Klopp as a knockout manager because I think that knockout managers tend to be better man managers and be quite adaptable during the game, being able to not just only change system but change the way his overall team plays. And we've seen Klopp do this many times if you think about when Liverpool were 3-0 down against Barcelona in the semi-finals of the Champions League back in 2019, and even a few years before that when Liverpool faced Dortmund in the Europa League. Klopp seems to have the ability to change matches, and it's not necessarily from his system. It can be a slight different tactical approach, maybe instructing one player to do one certain thing, but mostly it comes down to his man management ability, being able to communicate his ideas to his players in the most efficient fashion, which is why his sides always seem to be on the same page and rarely ever look like they aren't following a coordinated plan. And I would argue that Klopp is the best knockout manager in the world. He has taken Liverpool to 2 Champions League finals, which he won one of them, and back in 2013 he also took Borussia Dortmund to the Champions League final as well, and got to the final of the Europa League with a pretty poor Liverpool side before he was able to bring in the transfers that he wanted. However, I would consider Guardiola more of a league manager, as I think his defined philosophy does work better over the long term, but I don't think it's as good as Klopp's system or style when it comes to individual matches, particularly over a 2-legged tie, which is why we have seen Manchester City for the past few seasons arguably be the best side in the world, but get knocked out in games where you think if this was a Premier League game, or if City played this game 10 times, they would win this game probably 8 times. And I think that if there is one fault of Guardiola, it is his lack of pragmatism, and whilst Klopp very rarely deviates from his system and style in big matches, his system is a lot more suited to those high intensity games, whereas Guardiola isn't as much. And so I think if Guardiola was more adaptable, being able to change not just system but style of play, I think this would really benefit him in the long run, particularly in the Champions League. As I said in that Antonio Conte video, I do think Solskjaer is much more of a league manager than a knockout manager, and that isn't to say that necessarily his philosophy and style of play is as well defined as Jurgen Klopp's, as obviously I still think that Klopp is a better league manager than Solskjaer if you're trying to focus on the Premier League. However, if I have to put these managers in each category depending on what they're most like, I would put Solskjaer as a league manager, as I don't think he has the tactical flexibility or in-game management to be a knockout manager, and that is kind of why we see the best of Manchester United, certainly in the league throughout a long period. Even though it's not good enough to win the Premier League, it's still better than his Champions League performances. So let's move on to how I think Jurgen Klopp would set up this Manchester United side. So he'd obviously move to a 4-3-3 system using a narrow front 3, and I think he would use Bruno Fernandes in the Roberto Firmino position as a false 9, being the player to drop off from the forward line into the space in behind the opposition's midfield, being the link man between the middle and final thirds. Ahead of Fernandes, I do think that Klopp would use Ronaldo in that Sadio Mane role, playing as a wide forward, drifting into central positions, with the right forward of the 3 drifting over to the flank a lot more often than Ronaldo does on the left, in the same sort of way to how we see Mo Salah drift out to the right flank when Liverpool have the ball. In that right forward position, I think that Klopp would either be using Sancho if he wanted more of a playmaker on that side, because Sancho is an excellent progressor of the ball and his interplay down the right flank and ability to transition the attack with his quick dribbling was what made him so good at Borussia Dortmund. However, if Klopp wanted more of a goal scoring option and a player who could make runs in behind the back line, then Marcus Rashford or Mason Greenwood would be two excellent options in that position. And I do think that we would see both players thrive, particularly playing in that right forward position, as they would be higher up the pitch than they currently are in Solskjaer's 4-2-3-1, and both of these players are more forwards than midfielders, whereas Sancho is much more of a midfielder, so maybe Klopp would prefer Rashford or Greenwood in that position and maybe play Sancho as a false 9 in some games. I do think that Klopp's midfield 3 would definitely benefit Pogba a lot more than Solskjaer's midfield double pivot. Pogba would be used in one of the two central midfield spots ahead of the deep single pivot, and I do think that Klopp initially with this squad would opt to use Matic in that deep single pivot, with McTominay or Fred on the other side acting as a more workmanlike player, playing a similar sort of role to how we've seen Klopp deploy the likes of Wijnaldum, James Milner and Jordan Henderson over the past few seasons. With say McTominay on the left side holding his position when United have the ball in possession, this would allow Pogba on the right side to push further up the field, playing between the lines, and this would give him more freedom to push forward into the final third and become a creative threat. I do think that both Fred and McTominay would perform a lot better than they currently do for Solskjaer, because in that midfield 3 there would be less expected of them. They would basically be just doing a defensive job in central midfield, being the player whose job it is to push up and apply pressure during a press or shuttle over to one of the flanks to close down a player, and as long as neither get isolated in central midfield or have the burden of creative output from a deeper position, then they should be alright in this kind of role for the rest of the season. And I do actually think that McTominay could improve significantly under a manager like Klopp. In the backline, I do think that Harry Maguire would eventually be replaced by Victor Lindelof alongside Varane, because Maguire cannot play in a high defensive line, and that is one of the main principles of Klopp's defensive system. Klopp would have the United backline pushing up the pitch, squeezing the play and making them very vertically compact, and instantly we would start seeing United winning the ball higher up the pitch, and it would likely become an offensive weapon of its own. I definitely think that Luke Shaw would thrive in Jurgen Klopp's system, being given the freedom to push higher up the pitch, playing more as a winger than a traditional left back. And I do think that we would see Wan-Bissaka play a little more deeper than Shaw on the left side, holding his position, almost creating a back 3 in possession. In this Klopp system, I think Pogba and Jadon Sancho would definitely thrive, as both players are very good quick transitioning players, Pogba having the passing and dribbling ability to carry the ball forward when there's space in central midfield, and Sancho being excellent at dropping into the space in behind the opposition's midfield, receiving the ball and dribbling forward, and his passing decisions are excellent around the box, so not only would Klopp get the best out of Paul Pogba, but also Jadon Sancho as well. So before I look at 3 players who I do think that Jurgen Klopp could look to bring in the summer of 2022 for Manchester United, let's first look at the system and how Guardiola would set up this current United side. So I think Guardiola would predominantly be using a 4-3-3 system. I do think that in central midfield we would see him use a deep single pivot, with Fernandes and Pogba being used ahead as 3/8s, being given the freedom to push up between the lines, in the same role that we have seen Guardiola use the likes of Bernardo Silva and Kevin De Bruyne. Unlike Klopp's 4-3-3, the wide attackers either side of the centre forward would be used more as natural wingers rather than wide forwards moving into central positions. Both Rashford and Sancho would be perfect for these roles, with Sancho having the wide ability to progress a play into the box and create chances for others, with Rashford having the off the ball movement to make diagonal runs in behind the back line into goal scoring positions, as we did see him do against Atalanta. Ronaldo would be the centre forward of Guardiola's front 3, and I do think he would be used more as a deeper lying player to drop off and link the attack rather than being used as a sole poacher. Ronaldo's movement would be aimed to vacate space in the back line, dragging a centre back out of position, allowing players like Fernandes, Pogba and Rashford to make deeper runs into goal scoring positions. As I said for Klopp as Manchester United manager, I do think Luke Shaw would thrive under Guardiola, being used as either an inverted fullback or a fullback overlapping Rashford down the left side, and I do think that Shaw would definitely improve his technical ability in terms of his passing and his vision, and I do think he would become an elite level inverted fullback. At this current time, Wan-Bissaka would be used by Guardiola, as he is United's only real option at right back, as Dalot is not good enough, and Wan-Bissaka does have the defensive attributes to potentially allow Guardiola to use a back 3 in possession in a similar way to how he deploys Kyle Walker. He would see Wan-Bissaka holding a deeper position, creating a back 3 with Varane and Lindelof, or taking up a narrow position playing as an inverted fullback, with Shaw maybe given more freedom to push forward down the left flank, playing a lot more offensively than Wan-Bissaka would on the right. Like I said about Klopp, Maguire is going to struggle whichever side he plays in, as I do think he's dropped off significantly. He isn't commanding enough to be the leader in that back 4, he constantly causes chaos amongst other players, and he doesn't have the pace or acceleration to play in a high defensive line, so I could easily see Guardiola displacing Maguire and using including a combination of either Lindelof and Varane or Bailly alongside Varane as well. So now let's look at 3 players both Klopp and Guardiola could look to bring in come summer 2022. So in terms of the positions that I think these managers would look to improve, I definitely think they would both look to bring in a right back and a ball-winning central midfielder, whilst I think that Guardiola would prefer to bring in another centre-back on the left side, whilst Klopp would want to bring in another central midfielder to play alongside the ball-winning central midfielder and Pogba in that midfield 3. I'll start off with the ball-winning central midfielder, as it would be the same suggestion for both managers, and it would be Aurelien Tchouameni, as I think he fulfills both roles for both systems perfectly. He's a very good on-the-ball player, very press resistant, able to turn and drive out of a press, having good long passing ability, but most crucially, like Fernandinho and Fabinho have had for both Klopp and Pep Guardiola's side, he does have that brute force ball winning ability, being the destroyer to break up quick counter-attacks when the opposition win the ball back, so he would be very important for both Klopp and Guardiola's system if they were at Manchester United. In terms of the right back to be an upgrade on Wan-Bissaka, I do think that Guardiola would prefer a fullback who was good in central positions, able to play as an inverted fullback, very good passing and vision to be almost another creative player in those deeper lying positions, as we have seen the likes of Cancelo and Kyle Walker be used before. And I do think the perfect player for this role would obviously be João Cancelo, but it would be unlikely that City would sell him to Manchester United even if Guardiola did leave. So instead I would have gone for Giovanni Di Lorenzo, who's an excellent defensive fullback. He's 28, nearly 29 I think, would probably cost around £30 million plus, but he's one of the best fullbacks in Serie A, and he has good abilities either in central positions, playing as an inverted fullback, but can also play as a naturally offensive fullback, pushing forward, as he does have good crossing ability in the final third, so I think he'd be an excellent signing for a Pep Guardiola side. On the other hand, I think Klopp would prefer a more offensive wide fullback to provide the width in his narrow 4-3-3 system, allowing the wide right forward to push inside into central positions at times. And if he were Manchester United manager, I do think he would look to bring in someone like Tariq Lamptey from Brighton or Max Aarons from Norwich, both of who are good players in terms of their pace, their dribbling ability, and they're going to improve as they're only young players in their early 20s, so they could become top level fullbacks in the future, and Klopp would be the perfect manager to do this, as you've seen with the improvement of the likes of Robertson and Trent Alexander-Arnold since Klopp has come into Liverpool. Now, as I said, in terms of positions to upgrade, I think Klopp would prefer to bring in another central midfielder to play alongside Tchouameni and Pogba in that midfield 3, and I think Nicolo Barella would be the perfect player to fulfill this role. He has the ball winning ability that we see from the likes of Wijnaldum, Henderson, Milner and Keita to thrive in a Jurgen Klopp central midfield, providing the pressing ability, but also he's excellent technically, being able to provide creativity from deep, and a midfield 3 of Tchouameni with Pogba and Barella ahead of him would be absolutely insane. I think because Guardiola would primarily be playing Fernandes and Pogba ahead of Tchouameni, he would prefer to bring in another ball playing centre back to play alongside Varane, but from the left side, and I do think Lucas Hernandez of Bayern Munich would be the perfect player. His contract at Bayern Munich goes until 2024, so he'd have 2 years left on his current contract come the summer, and his loan deal at Prison FC is only for 6 months, so he should be available, and he does have great acceleration, pace, he's a great one-on-one defender. I think he's one of the best defenders in world football, and he's also an excellent ball player, as he did play at left back for France, and would provide the flexibility both tactically and positionally that Guardiola loves from his defenders. So thank you for watching. Let me know who you'd prefer as Manchester United manager, Jurgen Klopp or Pep Guardiola, in the comment section below. Subscribe and click the bell if you haven't already. Give the video a like. Check out some of my other videos linked in the description, and follow me on Instagram and Twitter for more content as well.